So let's start with Nvidia because Nvidia is it's now past $5 trillion this week in valuation. It's the most valuable company in the world and that has ever existed. And in my prediction, I've been saying for a couple of years, it's going to 10 trillion.
Nvidia or some other chip provider will invest money into OpenAI or some other foundation model only for the money that gets invested to be used to purchase compute or chips or data centers, et cetera. And so we are seeing some acceleration in timelines, companies that wouldn't otherwise be trying to raise now because they're trying to kind of time the market.
It is a robot with hands and fingers and a face that will walk around and do household chores for you. The funny joke of all of that is that there's a person somewhere else in the world with a VR headset and remote controls on, like walking around, pretending to open up your dishwasher.
I wonder if it's short-lived. I guess that's my thought process is I wonder if there's something kind of ephemeral about this, that it's hot and topical now, but will it still be meaningful and important in society in 5 years?
Hey, y'all. Long time no see. Let's talk about the hot topic of AI, both inside and outside the AI community. Everyone's worried there's an AI bubble. Damon, you're recently a new full-time VC after a little exit. I'd love to tell us what you're kind of seeing.
Yeah. So for people that don't know, I've been working part-time in VC for a number of years and have recently transitioned into a more full-time role where this has become, my day-to-day, following kind of the, acquisition of Scholar AI and the conclusion of a PhD. And the reality is there's lots of speculation kind of across the market on the state of AI. Are valuations becoming inflated? There's this idea of circular finance at the highest levels of this thing, right? Like, as an example, Nvidia or some other chip provider will invest money into OpenAI or some other foundation model only for the money that gets invested to be used to purchase compute or chips or data centers, et cetera. And so we are seeing some acceleration in timelines, companies that wouldn't otherwise be trying to raise now because they're trying to kind of time the market, so to speak. I didn't get to live through the original kind of tech bubble with any real consciousness. I was obviously alive, but I wasn't necessarily of an age where I could kind of observe what was happening in real time. In just like studying it in retrospect, these things feel a little bit fundamentally different in that there aren't really many people that are speculating against the rise and continuous kind of progress of AI and how much impact it's going to have. I think a lot of the speculation just becomes on which company is going to be the ultimate winner. So I guess like in the shortest version possible, I think we probably will see some moderate bubble pop, but I don't think that's actually going to be nearly as catastrophic as it was during the internet bubble of kind of the early 2000s, if you will. I mean, maybe famous last words, but
I think the thing that worries me the most, to be honest, about the whole like bubble conversation is basically what happened with like DeepSeek and Grok, where it felt like imitation and like the idea of there only being one winner sounds kind of wrong to me. Like, I don't know if that's like misplaced, but it just seems like when an innovation happens in the AI company space, like OpenAI is spending like what, like 1.4 trillion total capex on trying to build like 30 gigawatts of data centers. Grok, Amazon, everybody's trying to like buy a bunch of slices, but at a certain point, like these innovations and these models kind of become like a very expensive to build commodity, but like an intelligence layer that's fairly common. I don't know what that does to like the overall market because these valuations are a little crazy.
yeah, it's a fair point. I think the bet that people are making is that AI is not disruptive in the way that traditional SaaS is disruptive. It's disruptive in the way that like the industrial revolution was disruptive. And what I mean by that is like the TAM, if you're going to use kind of traditional language, is the entire workforce, or at least a very significant fraction of it. And so I think that people that are placing these bets, especially for the later stage AI deals, um, they just assume that, what's being disrupted is not AI software services. It's actual workforce, right? It's companies taking on OpenAI agents in replacement of, $30,000, $50,000, $70,000 per year employees. Time will tell whether that's the correct bet or not. The only other caveat I would say that's different, specifically this time, the other time, is a lot of the companies that are receiving the highest level of investment are hyperscalers in other domains. And so in that path, like even if there is some significant bubble pop, you'll see companies like Microsoft, Google, etc., being somewhat insulated from it, possibly because even though they're doubling and tripling down capex on AI, they still have other robust businesses elsewhere.
The argument that
So
people make with bubbles is when people say, "Is there an AI bubble?" They're saying two things. They're saying, "Is there something happening that's unjustified financially?" And number two, they're saying, is all of the stock valuation growth going to collapse in some major way, like we saw in 1929 or in 2001? These major stock market devaluations. They're implying something like one of those two scenarios. And so I just want to, having lived through of the three of us, I'm the one who has who was an adult at the time where the dot-com bubble happened. So I do remember it, and I was in tech, so I had kind of a firsthand view of this. There were a lot of companies that were going public that didn't have the revenue. It was a lot of eyeballs, user-based metrics that were driving valuations then, and that's what made that whole pillar of valuations at that time much more speculative. So I just want to give you some statistics. Um, let's start with Nvidia, because Nvidia is it's now past $5 trillion this week in valuation. It's the most valuable company in the world and that has ever existed. And in my prediction, I've been saying for a couple of years, it's going to 10 trillion. There's no near range competitor that's going to take share, and they can sell as many units as they can make of their chips. So it's purely a supply constraint. It's not a demand constraint. Nvidia is going to cross 113 billion in revenue this year. That they had 15 billion in 2021. So just 4 years ago, they were at 15 billion. Now they're 113 billion. Microsoft Azure, just their Azure AI business is going to cross 13 billion in annual run rate, which is a 5x year-over-year growth. AWS, its AI/ML revenue is growing 80% year over year. What the point I'm making is that there are real financial metrics underpinning this AI revolution and the growth. And so, just to return to an investor lens, because that's where I think what I think about and what I think is most useful. Nvidia continues to have massive amounts of room to run and is purely supply constrained. The data center business, I'll give you an example. One of my biggest positions is a company called Vertiv, which makes liquid cooling. They make racks and infrastructure and cables, all the stuff that you need in addition to a chip. In a massive data center, you need a whole lot more than just the chips. You need all kinds of infrastructure and cooling and power systems to make that data center work. And Vertiv creates those. They provide those to those data centers. That's another place where they have almost unlimited room to run. All of the hardware metal parts of this, I feel like, are very solid investments. The part of this that feels the most bubble-ish, the most speculative, is when you get to the large language model layer, where I think it's still unsettled who wins that war and what the shape of that looks like. Is there one winner that takes all? Are there sector winners? And then even more speculative than that, the application layer. There's going to be a lot of death in that arena. There's going to be a lot of capital and time invested in applications that die, and so it's still very early in those.
yeah, I'm very I kind of agree with you generally that I think it's very valid to be bullish Nvidia generally, and just the overall literal infrastructure layer. There are of course the bottlenecks that people talk about, and the power, and where we actually gotta get the supply chain up to speed to get these things working. It's just super scary to imagine again, I come back to that 1.4 trillion number, and OpenAI is one example. Obviously, they're kind of the hero example. They're very, very loud and center of the conversation. But when you're looking at the Anthropics of the world, again, circular deals aside, power grid problems aside, there are so many commitments being made to usage of these data centers that's predicated on exponentially growing revenue. And just at the moment, it very much feels like a lot of the AI application layer and the model layer is plateauing. The systems of scale are are not scaling the way that they should be. Like reasoning felt like a good step. Like the 4.0 model felt like a good step, but aside from those, there hasn't been something that's like hit the common people in a way that stood out really strongly. Um, I think especially looking at the application layer, you end up in like a really funny space because OpenAI. Did y'all watch OpenAI's like kind of like research roadmap video? They released it yesterday. It's very transparent, unusually so. Say what you want about Sam Altman, transparent, but like it was weirdly open given them historically, where their roadmap and like the way that you can make sense of Sam Altman's sale is that like they want to make an automated AI researcher that's predicated on all these reasoning and longer term background models that they've made. So the idea is that like I am some gigantic pharma company or I'm the government and I have an OpenAI data center that's running like solve this one cancer problem for me, right? That's like the longer term horizon. The place that starts is by 2026, like late 2026. They want to have a researcher that runs on the data centers that's able to create novel algorithms and novel scientific work off of consuming these data centers and their power and their load for a long time. Where does the revenue come from? It's not there right now to support that in the longer term, but like OpenAI is a little too big to kind of get killed. Like it'll get diluted to hell if they can't find that revenue, but it'll still do the thing that they want to do. Um, it just seems really scary to me to think about how fragile the application layer is right now in regards to revenue, I think, because ultimately all these are businesses. The things that are trying to run on the data centers, they need to survive to make the commitments that they're going to make in 2029 and 2028 and so on.
Question about this, Lakshay. Um, it feels like OpenAI wants to compete with everyone on everything. And in a way, I would like it makes me unsettled. It makes me prefer, for one of many reasons, I prefer Anthropic as a corporate bet, like which model wins, because Anthropic doesn't want to compete with its users, its customers. It doesn't want to take that direct ownership of research outcomes. It wants to just be infrastructure. In the same way that Nvidia is just infrastructure for other people to use to solve their own problems. And I feel like OpenAI doesn't have clarity on this. They want to be the everything provider for everyone, but that naturally puts them in competition with their biggest customers.
Pushing back
Yeah.
slightly, I think Anthropic is going down those various lanes. Like they just recently announced like their agent for Excel, basically, and these other things. Like I think OpenAI is just further along in the life cycle than Anthropic. Like they've just kind of saturated the use cases. And I think that, to Lakshay's point, the internal scaling factors that OpenAI was hoping to get to, they're just kind of running out. They basically used the world's data. Chain of thought and reasoning was kind of the next step. I think they're still looking for the next major breakthrough to be that B2B provider. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point. I historically, this like idea of boiling the ocean has been a bad idea. I think the challenge is, faced with the obvious data that OpenAI has to have access to, they have to know what the power users of these tools are doing with them. And so I think they're probably selectively trying to pick off verticals that they think are both high use case and high value. I have to imagine Anthropic will do the same. They just may not have gotten there yet, other than the Excel example or otherwise.
Yeah, my kind of take on it, Shashi, is like watching that OpenAI video. I would recommend watching if you haven't seen it. It's just like it's interesting to kind of like dive into like a little bit of the psychology and try and discern like what's marketing and what's real. My perception is I think OpenAI and Anthropic and any of these labs, for the record, like Grok, Thinking Machine Labs, like they're all racing a little bit off the edge of the cliff just because the inference of supporting all of these users is a growing demand. Like there are more use cases being developed and people come in with clever ways to use these tools than there is current capacity for. If you kind of like extrapolate from that like thesis, right? Like, it makes sense that like if you can figure out revenue and you win the verticals, all of your data center spend is justified, right? OpenAI is, I think, the furthest along, and like they were a research lab, and because of the revenue problem and the way that they're seeing usage, they're forced to be a much better product company. And in that video, they kind of refer to like they look at their longer term as like having the composition of multiple pieces. Sora for video generation, PayPal integration for e-commerce inside ChatGPT, longer term memory integration with your like E2E and like B2B tools. It kind of seems like their overall thinking is like, we're comfortable jumping out of the plane with like a parachute we're not super comfortable with, but we know like as we're going down, like the aggregation of those pieces will become something like generally very useful. And their path to that is just attacking verticals, basically, which is really, I mean, like, that's why like so the secondary markets are really, really interesting because that's where a lot of money in AI is being made. How fictitious or not, hard to say, but you look at the companies like Cursor that have developed like a very, very strong user love, and you're seeing OpenAI and Anthropic trying to pull those moves into their own products to take that revenue for themselves.
Yeah, it's the only, again, just doubling down, I think, a little bit on OpenAI has to have decent conviction in the verticals that they're choosing just based on the amount of usage they know is happening. Like they know the products that have been built on top of the OpenAI APIs that are getting, they're burning through the most tokens, right? They'll have kind of a real-time leaderboard of these are the use cases that are burning the most tokens. If we think the potential financial payoff is good, why not experiment with trying to spin up our own tools down that path? Yeah, it feels natural. They could burn up and die, but the reality is to justify the valuation they're at now, they have to grow, else they are dead anyway.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the secondary markets of the AI bubble. So like, I don't know if y'all saw, this is very, very recent. Neo is the first like humanoid robotic company that has a purchasable product that you can actually put in your household. For folks who haven't seen it, it is a robot with hands and fingers and a face that will walk around and do household chores for you. You pay $20,000 for it to have it delivered to your house in January, or you can pay $500 a month for it. The funny joke of all of that is it's teleoperated. Like there's a person somewhere else in the world with a VR headset and remote controls on, like walking around pretending to open up your dishwasher. And so it's a little bit funny, but I think it's like kind of like, it's a good example of like the problem of the overall bubble where even in the secondary markets, there's a lot of these like random companies that are like delivering promises, getting valued on their promises without like a good strategy for meeting that final timeline. Have y'all seen the Neo videos?
Yeah. Yeah. Hot take, though, maybe to kick this conversation off, I don't actually care if it's teleoperated or fully autonomous. If I can pay $500 a month for a household robot that does all of the chores that I don't want to do and does it well, I don't care if it's remote controlled by somebody in a third-party location or if it's fully autonomous, truthfully. Like $500 of that price tag to have all my monthly chores done, sign me up.
The funniest comment I saw on discussions about Neo is someone was worried that if AWS goes down, the robot will drop your baby.
That's
Josh,
how
have you seen it?
Nice. Yeah. I saw the video you posted, Lekshay. It's pretty interesting. You know, I kind of thought of it from the other end of how many personal assistants are there, and what if those personal assistants, instead of having to drive to your house, could just have a robot that lived at your house, sort of like it's sort of like Tesla's full self-driving, but starting from like a cruise control thought point of view rather than a car that drives itself, and then how do we backtrack from that toward realistic expectations. So in a way, I don't know, I wonder if having it work as like an extension of the personal assistant to be able to do even more easily would be an angle of pursuit.
So Damon, you said you would buy one. Like what? Like I assume it's like based in San Francisco or something. But like if you're in San Francisco, you'd like no hesitation pick it up.
I mean, I would have to see more on this specific model, but what I'm saying is if there was a product that could be delivered teleoperated or fully autonomous that could do the chores, laundry, cleaning, cooking eventually would be great, but doesn't have to start with cooking, but really just laundry and household vacuuming, sweeping, that kind of thing, dusting especially because I hate to dust. Assuming you can do those things for $500 a month, that to me feels like good value, right? And the things that can do it all the time. So, again, knowing what we know now, just on a value proposition of I can have all or a decent set of my monthly chores done for $500 per month or $20,000 in total. Yeah, I'm a buyer day one.
Would you? So one of the things that comes up in the video is it is like teleoperated, but it's matter of articulation is like naturally lower than what humans is. Like the
Sure.
amount of like ways you can move fingers reduced. Um, and so the funniest little clip, if I post this to short form, I'll like edit it in. The funniest little bit is you're watching someone teleoperating it, trying to open up a dishwasher, and it does this like weird, like sort of skeletal move trying to get the dishwasher open. And it at least takes like 30 seconds for it to figure it out. If you're paying $500 a month, like what is your baseline expectation for like this is good enough for it to be valuable for me?
I don't have to do it. Basically,
Okay.
like it's all just like on hours saved, right? Like I don't actually care if
Okay.
laundry now takes 3 times as long, so long as I'm not the one having to do it. Because even if it's 3 times as long, it's 100% saving on my time. So like there would just be some arbitrary sliding scale of the more I pay, the more I would assume my time is not spent doing those things.
The way I assume it properly gets adopted, like these people who are early buyers, like aside from maybe like the techno nerds of San Francisco who have a lot of money to spend on things, like I think the thing that realistically happens is at least for a little bit, it ends up being like a little bit of like, I have a retail office in my AI startup. We need to figure out a way to go viral. We buy this $500 a month robot for a couple of months and let it kind of go rampant in our office to do things and post content to see what happens. And like, will that be enough to like train a lot of interesting cases? I don't know, maybe. But it is really weird. I do want to like watch the space and just see what ends up kind of coming up. I think the other thing that was on my mind this week, did y'all see Cursor's big announcement? On the flip side of like secondary market value, I've turned from like kind of not bearish on Cursor, but very neutral on it to very bullish. Um, they released an agentic coding system that basically takes all the way that people were hacking together Claude code, built in like a native browser into like the Cursor experience, built in like the ability to parallelize background agents into the experience, like basically rewrote the IDE a little bit to be a more agentic flow, like one that works with vibe coders better. Um, they've they've like made their own model, so they're running and serving their own model specifically for coding that is comparable apparently to the foundational models available for coding, but runs much faster, like 200 tokens per second kind of thing. I don't know if y'all got a chance to see that or not.
Yeah, I've seen it. I don't have enough context on Claude code to be able to really like compare them directly. All of the coding that I've done is in Cursor, just like in the standard IDE. I found it's near perfect in the ways that I'm using it now. So I think it was a natural progression for them to be able to step into the agentic space. Like even in the chat window recently, they have like the queue, right? To where it's like I can give it task 1, I can then give it task 2, task 3 to end and have it work down through that. I don't really know specifically, just because this is not my world, what the advantage of a fully agentic coding solution looks like versus just how good the Cursor IDE is right now. But to me, there's a never-ending desire for new and or bespoke software, and so I just think the vibe coding is here to stay and probably only on an exponential. And so the companies that kind of win the space, I think, are going to be massive, and Cursor feels like as good a bet as any.
Lakshay, what's the benefit that you see in an IDE format versus a Claude Code terminal format?
Well, so Claude Code, like it has the benefit that you can kind of throw it wherever. The reason I switched to Claude Code like a couple months ago away from Cursor, because what Claude Code allowed me to do is that because it runs in a terminal, like it's limited to one folder. And what that means that like I can separate my Git trees.
Mhm.
For those who are not technical listening, Git is just like a way to like split up your code's like status. So I can say like I want to work on the website of my app. I want to work on the back end of my app. I can have Claude Code running multiple instances at any given time across those different like duplicates of my code and then bring them all together. And like, I just generally found at the time that I was working on Claude Code will work for longer to get a better result relative to what Cursor would do. And
Mhm.
especially because the task time was longer and I could run it at multiple times at once. What that allowed me to do is like, I could, when I was like hyper caffeinated, like 400 milligrams in or something, what I'd be able to do is like I would have like 8 or something different tasks going at one time. I'd just be bouncing between them until I hit my usage limits, basically. Um, and I found that like in the best case scenario, that was really, really efficient. Like I was able to cover a lot of ground and like burn through my weekly usage limits in like one day. But that one day was like more than enough to cover for being useless the 2 days before or whatever, right? What's happened now is that Cursor, so Codex is doing this too, where like they're focusing on this idea of background agents, which is effectively doing the same thing. Codex did it kind of first, I think, but their agents were like super slow, like super, super slow to the point that like as a developer, it didn't really feel like it fit into my development experience. What I think is kind of happening is that like the cadence of speed on what you might want to work on or how you want these agents to be working over like a time horizon, like there's a mix of agents that can work really fast for you and you want to be looking at what they're doing. And there's a category of agents that will work for a long time and you just look at the final outputs, right? And both those cases, like Cursor is serving a little bit more of both of those. And what's new, and this is also part of OpenAI's like interest in data centers and all this sort of stuff, is this idea of like kind of like runtime testing, where you can have secondary systems like interacting with the browser, like checking math or checking a Python script that will look at the results of what an agent did and test it in whichever way that's appropriate. Maybe that's a web browse. Maybe that's a like click into a Python script that can show your data state, that sort of thing, to then tell the agent, we went down the wrong way, try again. And Cursor just seems to be nailing like, here's what the people want. We're going to deliver it first and faster than anyone else, basically.
It's effectively just increased parallelization, right? I mean, that's kind of what you get in an ideal world with these multi-agent systems.
In my use case, I don't understand the use. I don't understand maybe what's the purpose of the background agent? Because they work fast enough if you are at the terminal. So why do you want an agent in the background coding for you?
Imagine you're not in the terminal. Let's say you're about to go on a flight to France or something, and you can just type into Slack like, hey, at Cursor, can you start working on this feature? I know the files are in this shape, or here's the PRD I care about. And it'll just start getting to work for you. And you can go review that later. You can pick up from where it stopped later. The idea being that, like, I think any one of these coding services, they're trying to aim at like the background experience replaces the developer in an ideal world. Like, you don't have to look at a terminal ever, hypothetically. Like, that's the big vision pitch.
There's so much what's called AI slop, and the root of this AI slop is the degradation of context over time in a long thread. You know, like the longer your coding thread is, the more likely your context has kind of fallen off, and it's just kind of running on short-term memory, like the last few things you said. Um, and so that's what I would really worry about in this idea of like a background agent. Like, how long is it going to go for? There's like token kind of concerns of like how much are you going to spend, but there's also like, well, how much have you forgotten about the important context? And by the way, like I've been using like the Claude MD file in Claude Code to load in all of my project details, and I found that that's a really good way of reducing context rot over time, like the loss of important context over time. So that's been a good hack.
Yeah, I think, I mean, like, so this is like reasons to be bearish on the idea of LM scaling to infinity being the solve for quote unquote AGI. Like, this problem of like trailing loss, I have not once felt comfortable with like not having a human in the loop in anything I'm doing. Right now, the way I'm progressing is that like as a human in the loop, I'm having to do less, and that's definitely good.
Yeah.
But like I am definitely, compared to I think most people, like when I describe the way I work to most people, they're like, "What's wrong with you?" generally. And the way that works, the way that happens to work when it does work, is because I'm generally like cajoling the system very intensely to begin with, and then once I'm at the end, like, or even in like the case where I'm like interacting with different instances of Claude Code, like I'm having to revise what it's doing all the time. It's just that I'm in the process that like I'm not worried about the like layer of the files. I get to worry more about the design and the architecture, being like, you shouldn't have done that. I want this file or these components shaped this way. or this backend to work this way, and then it's configured out, right? I think just right now, like the issue we're generally seeing, and the reason I don't code with background agents generally, like I still run all these systems and interact with them pretty intensely, exactly what you described. Like the context loss is just too significant. And it's like the permanent problem with LLMs generally. Like we started with hallucinations, we're still stuck with hallucinations. Yay, everybody. Like what are we going to do?
Yeah.
My understanding, though, for the medium and long term of these, background agents is the exact opposite of biasing for speed. Meaning, like, you're always going to have LLMs that can conduct things very, very quickly. And for the hands-on tasks in which you are physically sitting at a terminal in front of a computer, you are going to want reasonably fast answers. But a background agent, the luxury there is it can bias for quality and not speed. I can turn it on, I can let it run all night. When it comes back, that quality is much better than the LLM could have spit out in, a minute or two or 10. And so I think that some of the ambition of Cursor and others are more forward-looking, and it's like we don't want to complete software tasks that are currently being asked of us. It's how do we actually build this infrastructure, like you're saying, luxury towards AGI, and where it's like, go work on this new machine learning model for me. I don't know how to begin. Go try these various research paths, each one of you, 5 agents, come back with your answers, and then I get to evaluate which one of the 5 is best or, works best in practice or those kind of things. I think it's why you're seeing, OpenAI keep part of the research portion of their company alive, right? They're looking at how do we, either use some sort of mixture of experts, many serialized agents, et cetera, to do new scientific discoveries, as an example. And that's not like, I know what needs to happen, I want to do it faster. It's, I don't know how to do the thing that I want to do. Go work on this for a long time and hopefully bring me back a better answer.
Yeah, I think the place that the reason I feel like background agents haven't become so significant is that the place that people have had a lot of success with AI, this is being specific to coding. So this is outside of like science or healthcare or whatever have you. This is specifically about coding. There are definitely people who like code with Devin or they'll code with Codex. Like I know that there are people who have adopted it. I think the context in which those have happened is outside of prototyping and much more in like, I already have this gigantic legacy code base. Like, yes, it'll take you 20 minutes to figure out like what this database is supposed to do and how it interacts with the front end or something, right? Right now, I'm not really in a space that I am doing that. Like I'm in a space that I'm just like throwing shit at the wall, basically, and just trying things and building stuff like all the time, right? So I'm not like, I don't think I'm like currently the user who would get the most CSAT out of background agents. I'm sure there are people who are getting a lot of CSAT. Like I've even seen on Product Hunt where people will list Devin or Codex as like the development tool that they use. Like it's a weird badge of honor to say like this is developed with Devin. I'm just not one of those people. So
yeah, I think as a non-coding example, the way I could see this being really useful is like, hey, background agent, I want to fly to see my family for Thanksgiving. I am yet to book a flight back to my hometown. Can you please monitor prices in real time? And when you find one that falls below the, median or whatever, snag that for me. Like, I think that's reasonable.
Why is it always travel booking?
I don't know. It's the most annoying thing, right? It's like the most annoying thing. So, yeah. Restaurant reservation hawking, right? Like, hey, I want to get in this restaurant that takes me a month to book out. However, there's people dropping off tonight. I don't know. I'm not sure. Schedule maintenance is a challenge regardless, I guess.
Yeah. Interesting.
Maybe last topic for the day before we close. Damon, obviously you're kind of exploring the predictive market space. Kalshi, you want to talk about it? I'm not educated on all this, for the record. This is on you to speak to.
Yeah, no, happy to. I mean, so I'm happy to speak to kind of the anecdotes. I'm also happy to speak to kind of the way that I think the investment landscape is shaping up. So for those that don't know, Kalshi is a New York City-based prediction markets company. There's another off-sea, although it's coming to the U.S. soon, prediction market called Polymarket. And these things entered the public consciousness around the U.S. election last year in like roughly November when people were betting on who was going to win the presidency. As an example, the U.S. and other countries have a long history of gambling. I think you will find skeptics of prediction markets that put them into that bucket. I think the counter opinion would be that you're trading futures for various events in the same way that you're trading futures for corn or wheat or foreign currencies or even singular stocks or equities in companies, as an example. Prediction markets are very similar technically to options trading for anybody that's used to options trading. They're usually binary contracts. A thing comes in or it doesn't, and you're paid out a fraction of your vested or wagered stake. And so Kalshi and Polymarket are the two unicorns in the space. Both have raised at in excess of $1 billion valuations. Polymarket is in, I think, non-public discussions currently to raise at an increased valuation, call it 15-ish million, is kind of the circulating rumor mill, if you will. And there's lots of companies trying to get exposure to the space. There are significant dollars being moved in these kind of new asset classes. If you will, happy to kind of talk about what I think is reasonable, where I think the pitfalls may or may not be. But that's kind of the very short summary of it. For the public information that we can gather from Kalshi and Polymarket, each one is doing respectively about $1 billion a week in volume through the platform. So this is an absolute, mammoth of a new trend that we're seeing, and a lot of folks are kind of positioning it as the anti-robotic zag to AI. Right, so we're seeing money kind of flooding into three primary domains. I guess maybe three plus a fourth. But AI is soaking up a lot of the venture capital and kind of private investment in the space. Robots and defense are certainly drones specifically soaking up a large fraction of the investments, and prediction markets. People are flooding to prediction markets, both in the two players that are out ahead, the aforementioned Kalshi and Polymarket, and then some other tertiary players in the space. So happy to answer questions or specifically, but that's kind of the prelude.
In general, I don't like sports gambling. I'm not arguing for a specific kind of regulation, but I generally don't. I generally feel like it's bad for people to get deep in sports gambling, um, and um, and I also see this. I see this Polymarket Kalshi trend as part of a broader trend of there's always some way in which people want to make a quick buck. There was like the meme stock kind of period where the GameStop stock would fly, or the NFTs, or a bunch of kind of altcoins. And it feels like it's sort of following that same thread of like quick way to make some money, gamble on something. And um, I wonder if it's short-lived. I guess that's my thought process is I wonder if there's something kind of ephemeral about this, that it's hot and topical now, but will it still be meaningful and important in society in 5 years? I don't know.
I guess so. I guess I say this without being like I'm not really like a true quote unquote investor. I don't have a lot of financial opinions. So this is a question to both of you. What would it mean for, like you said, like Shashi, like the whole like GameStop, like retail investing phase, like the sort of meme stock thing was like a passing cloud a little bit. Like in a hypothetical that became more common, like what does that, like Robinhood has like feels to me like part of the vernacular, and I associate that a little bit with that sort of like meme stock era. Maybe incorrectly so, maybe that's not the popular opinion, but what would it mean
Robinhood
for like,
Robinhood uses Kalshi as their prediction market, by the way. So those
okay,
are technically synonymous now as well.
I see. I guess the intent of the question is like, what would a future that is like correctly part of the vernacular mean? Like, do you think that like when you say you think it'll be a passing thing, that like people will be on prediction markets and then their volume will very suddenly drop, or that like it won't be a thing to be a named prediction market? It'll just become more like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like just
Integrated
a
in the
very,
current financial system.
yeah, like it'll just be like an invisible thing that's there. Like, what does it mean for it to persist?
Yeah, I think this is a part of human nature that we're there. There's always going to be an element of kind of um, bet on something that will try to make a lot of money, from lottery tickets to altcoins and so on. So I don't think that part of humanity goes away, and so therefore I think there needs to be vehicles that absorb that energy and put it to work. Um, I think brand matters a lot, so there will be some kind of, just like in the sports betting with the um, FanDuel's and DraftKings, sports betting, the brand mattered. Um, and this is where a multi-sided market with lots of brand power will matter. So I think that will persist. I would expect that to persist, but I don't know if it will be so topical, I guess, in the sense that, like, will we be thinking about it? Will the volumes continue to be growing at that kind of rate, or will they reach sort of a steady state and they are what they are?
Yeah, it's the open question. We're seeing all the institutional high to medium frequency firms pivoting there, and to the point on DraftKings and FanDuel specifically, they're purchasing prediction market companies. So that kind of sportsbook model is becoming quickly outdated, and there's lots of reasons for that. But most of the money that was historically being transacted on those platforms are migrating to prediction markets, and also most of those companies, I shouldn't say most, there's a number of those companies, a few that have announced publicly, a few that haven't yet, that are shifting their risk mitigation strategies onto prediction markets as well. So we're seeing it shaping up in the financial world much more like an extension of commodities trading, which it probably is honestly going to be regulated as a commodity reasonably soon. There's still some debate around that. Right now, it's mostly regulated under a swaps contract, but we do think it's probably going to be commodity reasonably soon. Again, TBD on that. But like Don Jr., as an example, is an advisor on both the board of Kalshi and Polymarket. Like, I think it's a reasonable question whether or not it's going to have sustaining power, but I would need somebody to explain to me why it isn't options trading in order for me to believe it's not going to be here kind of in perpetuity. Different shapes, almost certainly, but people are going to bet on these things. And so long as I can hedge my risk in other financial instruments on these things, it's difficult for me to imagine them not having some sort of sustaining power.
I guess we'll wrap there for the day. We're out of time. So thank you all. We'll catch you all next week. We're going to be going back to somewhat regular, hopefully, going to the holidays. So stay tuned. Thank you all. We'll catch you all next week.